Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 870B, and today's date is January 18th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Economic Collapse is Happening, and the next phase, it's the event. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. The interview with James Corbett has been uploaded to the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel, and you can go right over to that YouTube channel, or you can come over to the x22report.com site, scroll down a little bit, you'll see it on the right-hand side, or you can go to the newssentinel.com site. This is the site where we're streaming multiple news sources into one location. You'll see the video on the right-hand side. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, the U.S. government central bankers, they've been trying to remove our rights for a very long time. They've been trying to control us. They've been spying on us. They've been violating all our rights. And this hasn't stopped because they knew eventually that this collapse was coming, and it's easier to control a people if they don't have any rights. And we see that there are still some individuals out in different states that are trying to pass different legislation. We see that State Representative Mary Margaret Oliver introduced House Bill 731, which would ban commonly owned semi-automatic firearms and require their confiscation. HB 731 would ban the possession, sale, transport, and distribution or use of certain firearms defined as assault weapons, based entirely on cosmetic features. This legislation would also prohibit arbitrarily defined large-capacity magazines that typically come standard with all firearms, as well as 50 caliber cartridges. And this legislation, I shouldn't even say it's a law, this bill, would require the seizure of these firearms by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And we see there are still some states out there, some representatives, who are trying to push this type of legislation, even though this violates the rights of the people. They just don't care. Because in the end, the whole thing is about control. And what I mean by control is they're worried about the people taking control. A people without weapons, they're controllable. A people with weapons, they cannot be controlled, and they know this. And this is why our government employees have been spying on all of us, because they need to know what we are up to. Of course, they have different agendas to blackmail judges, to steal ideas, investment, information, but mainly it's to keep tabs on everyone because they just don't trust the population. And they want to know what everyone is up to. And on the other hand, we have sheriffs out there, like Florida Sheriff Grady Judd. He is urging residents in the country to arm up, stressing that it is more important to have a gun in your hand than a cop on the phone, which I completely agree with. If somebody is breaking into your home or is in your home, how long does the police take to get there? 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 minutes? 12 minutes, 15 minutes? Well, guess what? The crime has already been committed. They end up getting there after the fact. If you have a weapon, that's your protection. Now, out in North Korea, we realize that the United States is basically just playing a propaganda game at this time. They're using it to provoke North Korea. North Korea has already come out and said, listen, we will suspend nuclear testing if you discontinue the drills. We're looking for a peace deal. The United States said, I don't think we're going to do that because we already have commitments, and we're going to continue with the drills right next to your country. Now, this is all done to provoke North Korea. The United States has also demanded from China to stop its export of petrochemicals as well as importing anthracite from North Korea. So they're lumping China into this. They want China to break away from North Korea with their business deals. And we see at this point in time, this is all about provoking and pushing around these countries. And we're going to see this accelerate as this year progresses. We also see the Polish president out there saying that the construction of Nord Stream 2 contradicts the EU legislation. And what they're trying to do right now is they're trying to stop the Nord Stream pipeline. And this pipeline is going to transport gas from Russia across the Baltic Sea to Germany, to the UK, France, Denmark, and other countries, guess what, bypassing Ukraine. So already the private Western Central Bank countries are trying to push the idea that this is not good for Europe, and they're trying to stop this. They don't want this pipeline to be built. Remember, they had the coup d'etat in Ukraine to capture the gas network, to profit from it. They also wanted a port on the Black Sea. It's also a country which butts up against Russia. It's in a strategic location. This is why Biden decided to put his son on the board of directors. John Kerry placed his roommate in the inside of these companies. This is why the United States is funding and loaning money to the Ukrainian government. All of this is being done for profits, for taking control. Ukraine already right now is warning that more malware is attacking other areas of Kiev's infrastructure. They're saying one of the malware have hit Kiev's airport, and it might be in other IT systems. So what they're doing right now is they are setting this up to blame all of it on Russia. They've already said the power infrastructure was hit by this malware, which came from Russia. Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, were already in Ukraine, and they helped the Ukraine government and other entities figure out where this came from. And of course, it came right from Russia. But we've already discussed that this malware was developed back in 2007, and pretty much everyone has it. So anyone could have planted this malware in this area. And I believe this was for two reasons. One was to get the war going with Russia. This is a false flag. Two, they wanted a test to see if they had the ability to bring down the infrastructure, a power grid. And they did. Because as we know, everything is set up in the United States for the event. And this was another test. Out in Yemen, we're starting to see that there's Blackwater mercenaries that are on the Saudi side, and these are paid mercenaries. The Blackwater mercenaries are being beat by the Yemeni forces, and everything the U.S. is trying to do, everything Saudi Arabia is trying to do, is not working. The Yemeni people, the Yemeni forces, they are much tougher than they thought. And at this point, everything they've tried is a miserable failure. They can't capture and control Yemen. It's completely impossible. And you have to remember, the United States is selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. They're using the most advanced weapons in the country. They have air superiority, and they have the numbers, and they just can't win against the Yemeni people. And we see this a lot throughout the Middle East, where the people who are fighting for their country, for their way of life, that they are winning against the puppet governments, the advanced weapons. And we see this is happening in Libya. We see it in Lebanon. We've seen it in Iraq. And we've seen it in Syria. Now, over the weekend, the sanctions were lifted on Iran. And then the U.S. came out and they placed more sanctions on Iran because of their ballistic missile system, their tests that they've been doing. And Iran right now has accused the U.S. of hypocrisy and said that the new sanctions imposed by the U.S. are completely illegal. And Iran is stating that arms sold by Washington, they're being used against people in Palestine, Yemen, and this is completely hypocritical. And I completely agree. I mean, what we're seeing right now is that their ballistic missile system has nothing to do with the P5+1 agreement, because the IAEA has already stated that there are no nuclear weapons whatsoever. And Tehran is saying, listen, we will continue to enhance our missile capabilities despite what Washington does. And like I said before, we see two things happening in the U.S. government. We have Congress, which is controlled by foreign governments like Israel, pushing their agenda. And then we have the White House, which is controlled by the central bankers, pushing their agenda. And they're both colliding at the same time. This is why we see this mix-up going on, where we see sanctions removed, sanctions placed on Iran, and the whole thing does not look good for the United States. Now, the U.S. is continually pushing the meme that Putin is isolated and the rest of the world is stepping away from him. Well, that's not exactly true, as we know that Russia has been making deals, economic deals, all around the world. Other countries are looking at Russia saying, okay, they are really doing a great job in Syria. They wanted Russia to come in and help them with the problem of with the Islamic State. And now we see Japan calling for closer ties with Russia. And this whole thing about Putin being isolated, he is far from being isolated. Actually, he is calling the shots around the world, and the world is taking notice. And President Abe is saying that I believe it's time to have a dialogue with Russia. And at this time, we can see that a lot of these countries are starting to realize, okay, this system that we're attached to, the U.S. central bank, the system of the dollar, is falling apart. We see a new system being created by Russia and China. A lot of the countries now are taking on the reserves and doing business with Russia and China, while still doing business with the United States government central bankers. But more and more, as time goes on, are switching and making the move over to Russia and China, because they realize and they see what is happening right now. Qatar, who is working with the U.S. to get Assad, realizes that Russia is in there, and now Qatar is saying, you know something? We're going to strive for more stability on the energy market with Russia at this point, and we need more cooperation with Russia. So we have Japan, we have Qatar, we have Saudi Arabia, we have Egypt, and we're seeing more and more countries cozy up to Russia. Now, there are reports all over the corporate media that 3 Americans have been kidnapped in Iraq. These are contractors. They were kidnapped in Baghdad by militias. And the State Department came out, said it was, not aware of the report, and they're working with the Iraqi authorities to locate the missing Americans, but did not confirm that the individuals have really been kidnapped. So we're going to have to watch this situation a little bit closely to see what is happening there. Now, out in Madea, we see, and this is in Syria, we understand that this whole thing is a propaganda scheme ginned up by the United States government central bankers to make everyone believe that Assad is starving his own people, which makes absolutely no sense, because we are starting to realize that everything the United States government central bankers are doing at this point in Syria is propaganda to convince everyone of why Assad shouldn't stay in power. We go all the way back to the sarin gas, to the barrel bombings, to pictures of him torturing people. They all turned out to be fake. And right now, the citizens in Madea, they are saying that, yes, there is aid coming into this area, but what's happening is that the rebels, they are seizing the humanitarian aid, and they are selling it at ridiculously high prices. For example, a kilogram of rice was fetching as much as $250. So, the rebels, who are backed by the United States government central bankers, they are intercepting the humanitarian aid, taking it, and trying to sell it off to the people. Because once again, why would Assad starve his own people? Russia and Syria are liberating thousands upon thousands of towns and cities inside of Syria. Why all of a sudden would he start to starve his own people? How would this help him? How would it help the rebels? Well, it would help the rebels by framing Assad, just like they framed him with the barrel bombs, which really didn't exist. How they framed him with the sarin gas. How they framed him with these pictures of torture, which never linked up to Assad. They were just pictures showing people in a hospital, which is meaningless. There is no proof of anything else. So we see at this point, the United States government central bankers, they are trying everything and anything to get Assad out of power. Now, the United States is taking complete credit for cutting the Islamic State salaries in half. Yes, you heard me right. Everything that Russia has done by destroying the oil convoys, by showing that Erdogan was basically selling the oil on the black market, working with the Islamic State, which is the proxy army of Turkey, of the United States, of Israel, of UK, and the United States is taking credit for it. Just like the United States took credit of the bombing of the oil convoys and showed Russian footage and pretended that it was theirs. But since the beginning of the air operation in Syria, Russia's warplanes have made over 5,240 combat sorties. Among the thousands of terrorist targets eliminated, an estimated 2,000 terrorist-controlled oil infrastructure facilities have been destroyed. This is in what, 4 months? Meanwhile, the US, UK, and the coalition forces have been working at this for 2 years or so now, and they have not gotten the same results as Russia. This tells you something, because we have to remember, under the United States and the coalition forces, the Islamic State expanded their territory. With Russia and Syria, their territory is contracting. We see the difference, because as we know, the Islamic State is the proxy army for the United States government central bankers. Now we realize that this economy right now, it's cracking apart. The whole thing is collapsing. The central bankers do not want to be blamed for what is happening. We know they have an event set up. Right now, DHS is out there, and they're saying that cyber attacks on the United States critical manufacturing sector nearly doubled in 2015. This increase over previous years is primarily related to a widespread spear phishing campaign that primarily targeted critical manufacturing companies. This is why manufacturing is down, by the way. No, come on. Manufacturing is down because all manufacturing has been shipped off out of the United States to other countries like China. This is why we don't have manufacturing. But what they're trying to say is that cyber attacks are increasing here in the United States. As the economy continues to accelerate in collapse mode, we are going to see the next event. The central bankers, the U.S. government, they're running out of time. They need to push this event forward. They need to get the war started. Otherwise, this whole entire collapse is going to be blamed on them. They don't want this to happen. We already hear them saying, this is coming from the Fed, that this entire scenario of the economic downturn, it's not their fault. It's China's fault. It's not their fault. It's everyone else's fault. Well, guess what? This entire economic collapse is the central banking system's fault. They created this monster. Our U.S. government supported this monster, and now it's collapsing. And they will need some gigantic event to take all eyes off of their failure and put it someplace else. This is what they're planning. We're coming to the point right now where they're going to give the green light to this next event to cover up this entire system collapsing. This is what we're seeing right now. We're heading towards the end game right now. Now, will this happen next month? The month after? We don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But as we see the market continually come down, they're going to do whatever they possibly can to keep it up in the green area. But if they can't do it and the market starts coming down faster and faster, they're going to give the green light. They're going to say, okay, we have no choice, because they're not going to let the system fall apart and be blamed for what is coming. They want a war. They need the event to cover up the entire collapse of the system. And this is why they've been planning for this. This is why they're getting ready to do a multi-staged event across the country in Europe to convince everyone we need to go to war. We need to fight those countries, the group that destroyed our economy. This is why the president came out and said, the economy is doing well. You're foolish not to believe me. The U.S. government central bankers, they will keep this illusion that the economy is fine until the very end. They will continue with the lie. They will not stop until they have the event and they show that this collapse of the economy was caused by another group or another country. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.